We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 11th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to our programme from Switzerland. Coming up, the UK government sanctions two far-right Israeli cabinet ministers.
These two individuals, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, have been inciting violence against Palestinian people for months and months and months.
We'll ask whether Israel's allies are losing patience. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, as Donald Trump doubles down on sending the Marines to Los Angeles, we'll explore the effect of militarization of the security of the city. We'll hear about the latest plans for Eurostar to extend its routes into Europe.
The move represents a €2 billion expansion that comes at a pivotal moment for the rail operator after its monopoly on cross-channel services comes under threat.
Plus, Apple says it's invented a new material, and our newspaper review comes from our studio in London. Monocle's Julia Lassecker is standing by. Good morning, Julia. What have you spotted?
Good morning, Emma. Well, one of our stories today will take us to Armenia, where we will explore the relationship between Russia and Armenia. Apparently, Armenia is now done waiting for a protector that never arrives.
Thank you for that. And we'll find out why South Korea is swooning once again as K-pop demigods BTS complete their military service. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from Zurich. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. US and Chinese negotiators have agreed on a framework to implement a truce on the current trade war between the two nations. An Argentinian court has upheld the fraud conviction of the former president Cristina Kirchner, and 3 days of mourning have been announced in Austria after 10 people were shot dead at a school by a former pupil who then killed himself. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories, but first you may have noticed a slight change in sound, a little bit of an alteration in acoustics today for The Globalist. That's because The Globalist is decamped to Zurich for a morning. Joining me around the table, standing up, is our executive editor, Chris Lord. Good morning, Chris.
Good to be with you, Emma.
Isn't it good to be back in Zurich?
It's amazing. I mean, out there today is a beautiful summery day. There are already people out around the lake enjoying this really crisp, lovely morning out there.
It is one of those things that when you arrive in Zurich, you forget that a city can create breathing space for itself. That, the Badi is full already with people going for early morning dips. I've seen people on bicycles going to their yoga class and what have you. And it's not necessarily that much of a city of leisure, but it knows how to slot it into its daily routine, doesn't it?
It does. And also last night we took a little walk around the lake, and just the profusion of little bars, cafes, restaurants that gather, that open, that are seasonal as well, and it just sort of brings all that public space to life. So, Zurich just does leisure and work so well.
It does. We'll be talking to you in a little while because as our former LA bureau chief, you'll be able to talk to us about what's happening with Donald Trump and the Marines. But first, let's turn to our first story of the day. The United Kingdom is to impose sanctions on two leading figures in the Israeli government for what they call repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities in the occupied West Bank. The far-right ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich will be banned from entering the United Kingdom and will have any assets in the UK frozen. Well, I'm joined from London by Daniela Peled, managing editor of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Welcome back, Daniela.
Good morning.
The exact reason for the ban, I've just quoted there, repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities. Could you flesh that out for us, please?
Well, both Smotrich and Ben Gvir are prominent leaders of the far right Israeli settler movement. I mean, much of the settlements in Israel, although illegal by international law, are communities across the Green Line. Many people have moved there because the housing is cheaper, you get various benefits, etc. But there is a hardcore who support violence against Palestinians. It's been an incredibly violent year for Palestinians in the West Bank. And these are two moral leaders, if you will, once very much part of the extremist fringe, but now they have an enormous amount of power. As you said, Smotrich is the finance minister, and he said that his aim has been to increase settlement building and protect the settlers. Indeed, this government has approved a record number of settlements in the West Bank. Ben Gvir, astonishingly, is National Security Minister, basically in charge of much of the security, internal security. A man who once convicted of supporting Jewish terrorism. Obviously, both live in the West Bank, and both have made extremely heinous statements. Smotrich has said about Gaza. He said that, well, they should all leave. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. He totally supports a complete blockade. The rhetoric has really, really been appalling. And not just rhetoric, but it seems that they're quite influential. And as I said, violence against Palestinians in the West Bank has been soaring since the attacks of October 7th.
Is there any surprise at this announcement by the United Kingdom? Because the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said that this is a decision that had been a long time in the making.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the UK, like all countries, has got a whole sort of set of diplomatic moves in its armory, and this is symbolic, but it's really quite profound. I mean, this is not the UK acting alone. This is taking decisions together with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway. The UK has sanctioned some settlers before, but these are serving government ministers. I mean, this is a very, very serious move, and one that really puts them at odds with Washington as well. There was already been condemnation of this move from the White House. So yeah, this is a major development, if performative, but very, very, very strongly so.
Indeed, the fact that there is this alliance, the UK, Norway, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, making this an announcement, what does that say about any sense of a broader realignment now? That are Israel's allies now losing patience?
I think Israel's allies started losing patience really a long time ago. There are many, many reasons for Israel to have allies, from trade, security, from historic ties, but patience has been wearing incredibly, incredibly thin because the Netanyahu government is not giving any of its allies anything to work with. It continues the war beyond any reason. It continues to carry out what so many have deemed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. And there's no cooperation really with the international community over this. The whole it's incredibly botched insistence on delivering its own aid rather than international aid agencies, which has led to the deaths of many, many Palestinians. International solidarity, on a government level, is really, really struggling. And there is some strength in numbers. There's a coalition taking this move, but ultimately, this is, as I said, this is performative. I mean, last year in September, the UK suspended 30 of its arms exports to Israel. And again, this has absolutely zero impact on Israel's ability to wage war. But it was another very, very strong message and very, very strong step. But really, these allies are actually pretty limited in what they can do to make a difference on the ground.
And looking at the United States reaction to this, the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said that the UK isn't acting like an ally to either Israel or to the United States, described the sanctions as, I think it was ill-timed and unfortunate, said it was an incredible overreach. So there's a very strong reaction from the United States and indeed from Israel, which is going to meet next week to decide on a response. I mean, what can the US and Israel realistically do?
Well, they can. They have an armory of diplomatic measures in their, in their playbook as well. And certainly, Israel has got has many cards to play when it comes to security and intelligence sharing. But certainly, I mean, the reaction from America is fairly predictable. The reaction in Israel, almost surprising in a way, because these two figures are incredibly unpopular. I mean, the Netanyahu government is incredibly unpopular, and it has been since before the start of the war in Gaza. But these two, the reason these two are in the government is to keep Netanyahu in power. That's the only reason. And he's largely in sway to them. They're very unpopular amongst Israelis across the spectrum. However, this is unprecedented. These are sanctions against the serving government ministers, democratically elected government ministers. Benny Gantz, a prominent leader of one of the opposition parties and no fan of these two, described it as a profound moral failure. And I think Israelis are also worried that this could be a slippery slope and that sanctions could be levied against less extreme members of the government. I mean, don't forget, we already have the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his former defense minister. I mean, all these actions alone may not make a huge difference, but it's certainly ramping up the pressure.
Daniela Peled, Managing Editor of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Thank you for joining us on the line from London. You're listening to The Globalist, live from Zurich. It's 23:11 in Los Angeles, 8:11 a.m. here in Zurich. And although their powers are chiefly restricted to helping immigration officers carry out their work, the presence of the National Guard and the Marines on the streets of Los Angeles will not go unnoticed. So how does the city, which has bitter memories of 1992's widespread riots, fare with this heightened moment of security, especially as the deployment was made by Donald Trump and resisted by the city and state themselves? Well, joining me round the table here at Dufourstrasse 90, I'm delighted to say, is Gorana Gurgic, who's Monocle's security correspondent, plus Monocle's executive editor, former LA bureau chief Chris Lord, joins me once again. A very good morning to you both. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, man.
Thank you for coming in. Just, Chris, let me begin with you, because as someone who's lived and experienced and breathed Los Angeles, the thought that the National Guard and the Marines are on the streets, how is that going to be received?
Look, not only are the National Guard there, there's a curfew now in place on the streets of downtown LA right now. After 8 p.m, everybody has to be off the streets, apart from emergency services, journalists and so on. It's a dark day in LA's history, really. And you referenced in your intro the LA riots of 1992, which, lots of my friends, peers I knew over there grew up through that period of the 90s, when the streets of around Pico and Boulevard and these areas that were sort of the epicenter of those riots left a kind of deep scar through the middle of the city and the psyche of the place. And I think in a way what's happening here, there's a little bit of that being played out again in the view of the Trump administration. They think that they can turn this into the 1992 riots when, famously the then Republican governor of the time asked George H.W. Bush, send in the Guard because we've lost control. The reality is, of course, that despite that sort of imitation of 90s efforts from the federal government, the reality is here it's so small, these protests. I mean, I look at what's going on. We're talking about 5 streets of downtown LA have seen any protests at all. And it's pretty contained. And so I think that the theatrics of this will upset a lot of people who grew up with that and remembered what it was like in the 90s. And it's going to leave a very long tail, I would say.
The wider security context, Gorana, is what? Given the fact that there are many cities around this world that, were they to have the Marines and the National Guard deployed, would find it impossible to fathom. Yet, is there a sense that the United States is slightly more accepting of sending in the military?
Yeah, there are a couple of layers here, and I would just underscore what Chris has said about the localized character of these incidents now, and also just the fact that most of the protests have been peaceful, right? And we can't, go away from that fact. And, we are miles away. We are relying on a lot of reports that are coming, but of course, a lot of this is sensationalized. And I would just urge that we sort of take a step back and really kind of look at it in the context of what's going on in LA, where most of the people are actually going about their daily lives as they were, right? But then what you asked about the kind of wider security context and what this might mean in terms of law enforcement in urban settings and in general, this sort of basically the relationship between any kind of civil action and then on the other side, the various representatives of state apparatus, I would underscore again that U.S. is a bit different here and can't be as compared to other Western democracies because of a couple of things. And I think a lot of the kind of changes as a kind of inflection point go to 9/11, when actually there were a lot of laws that were passed when it comes to Homeland Security. After all, we have a Department of Homeland Security that was established as a result, which has made it easier basically for the law enforcement, for the police to start acting in a way that you would expect military to act. And, this is now the kind of way that we have also seen that, some of the protests are controlled in a number of different waves of protests. Think about what Black Lives Matter, for instance, or what's going on here. But of course, there is an additional layer. It's not just about the militarization of police forces. It is about actually sending military officers of different kinds, right? Whether it's National Guard, whether it's Marines, to the site of the protest. And this is something that's quite exceptional.
And the context, in addition to that, well, we have the Homeland Security context that Goran has just mentioned, Chris, but the fact is that we have this highly polarized, politicized situation going on as well. So that sort of Venn diagram, when it meets in the middle, is very volatile, isn't it, Chris?
Look, yes, Donald Trump has turned this into an opportunity to present himself as a law and order president. And I think it's interesting, Gorana's reference to the BLM protest, because I know that in some respects what he wants to do here, of course, that all happened in 2020, towards the end of his rule, his last term in office, when he did lose control of many cities. And I think here he wants to again try and sort of remake the narrative a little bit and show that he can be that kind of law and order president that he presents himself to be. But at the same time, we cannot forget that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, also is a politician, also is somebody who can see an opportunity to reframe himself somewhat. He's coming towards the end of his post as governor of the state. He has made no illusions about the fact that he wants to potentially make a run for president, potentially as soon as 2028. There is a lot going on here. He made a televised address overnight, talking about a brazen abuse of power, that the core of democracy was under threat by sending in the National Guard and the Marines. Look, I think that there is competing forces here to run this narrative. And the problem is, as Gorana mentions, the problem that you've got is that you've got war fighters being deployed in pursuit of that. And similarly, you've got then the courts being involved to try and block that. So all these elements of state apparatus, for want of a better term, are being employed on something that is still, we cannot forget, limited to literally in the hundreds of people who are turning out.
Just staying with you for a moment, Chris, that idea that the politicization of this, what kind of support does the California Governor Gavin Newsom and indeed the LA Mayor Karen Bass enjoy locally that could actually enable the city itself and the region itself to dial down as much as it can?
Both of these people are very, very damaged figures in the eyes of local voters. They are perceived, certainly Karen Bass, perceived to have failed on the wildfires that just a few months ago wrecked much of Los Angeles. You've got Gavin Newsom, who in the eyes of many Californians feel that he let the ball He dropped the ball when it comes to the big homelessness problem that has stricken many cities up and down California over the last 5-6 years. Similarly, there is a feeling that Mayor Karen Bass, frankly, was on the ropes when this happened already. So this is an opportunity for them to push back to some extent and present themselves as of another face. We do have to clarify that, though, and remember that Donald Trump won that last election on a thumping majority. And he ran on a ticket saying that he would do mass deportations. Americans knew what they were voting for. And actually, I was just reading this morning some of the thoughts from across the country, across the US, about how they're viewing what's happening in LA. And actually, there's many mixed views. Lots of people feel unhappy and uncertain about the idea of deploying the National Guard, about militarization, all these things that we're talking about. They feel cautious and worried to see that. But at the same time, they know that Donald Trump was going to do this. They know that he was going to see it through to do these mass deportations. And therefore, the protests, frankly, aren't winning as many hearts and minds as you might think.
Gorano, Donald Trump now, as Chris has just said, turning a relatively small protest into quite a significant opportunity for his agenda. But what kind of tinderbox is he playing with in the United States?
Yeah, that's a really important question because, of course, this is just a continuity of what Trump has been doing. And again, echoing what Chris has just said about, Donald Trump presenting himself really as a law and order president. This is just part of that political theater. And you just think about where we were in terms of the news cycle just last week, what we were talking about and where we are today. No one is talking about the big, beautiful bill or his fallout with Elon Musk and so on. Now it's basically, again, scenes playing out very much like those ones in the summer of 2020 when we have these punchy one-liners, Back then it was when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Now it's when they spit, we will hit, right? And it's basically this sort of political theater that is very dangerous. It's at the level of political elites, of course. Again, what Chris has said, I would absolutely agree with the idea that now we have two competing sides, right? The Democrats and Republicans in that sort of sense where some of the, potential aspirants for the presidential ticket, like Gavin Newsom, in 28, right, are trying to make this almost, inviting a fight to have Donald Trump invoke potentially Insurrection Act, right? But you never know how much it can escalate then and how you will actually de-escalate or get out of that spiral. And then, of course, at the level just of the electorate of whether, again, you are on more D side or R side, for both sides of the political spectrum, this is reaffirming what they thought about the other side, right? Republicans basically see what's going on in California as a state that has lost control. And I would say California element is a big one here, right? It's the richest of all the states in the United States. It has traditionally been one of these kind of bastions of progressivism, for better or for worse, right? Like there are problems there as well. And Chris has already highlighted some of those. And then for the Democrats, of course, this is yet another sort of instance of the country sliding away from being a consolidated democracy, right? Because again, in any other country around the world, if we saw some of these scenes, we would say, well, that doesn't quite look like, they have it all together, right? And basically they are trying to do things when it comes to law enforcement in a way that would maybe control the crowds or de-escalate the situation. They're actually throwing in, again, Marines, National Guard, who are not equipped necessarily to deal with these types of things, right? They are trained to engage in combat, and this is dangerous, right? The kind of potential for this to escalate just with a couple of things going wrong, we can't underestimate that. But again, coming back to the very beginning of our story, this is still very localized, and we should not make it into a story that sees all of California, on fire.
Gorana Gergic, Monocle's security correspondent, and Chris Lord, Monocle's executive editor. Thank you so much. Chris, we're going up a mountain later today, aren't we?
Can you believe it?
Yes.
I know. We're heading to Wengen.
We are, and we'll be doing the Globalist from Wengen tomorrow morning,
Certainly
so stay tuned. If we can cart the stuff up the hill, Desi Ray-Vandley is going to be responsible for making sure that everything runs smoothly. Thank you both for joining me around the desk here at Dufourstrasse 90. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson, coming to you from Zurich. Still to come on today's programme. BTS, the K-pop giants, are released from military service and everyone is all of a quiver. Stay with us.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
We head back to London for today's paper review. Joining us from our studio at Midori House in London is our Monocle writer, Julia Lassica. Good morning, Julia. How's it looking in the British capital today?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty sunny. Good morning, Emma. We're also gearing up for a nice sunny day here in London.
Good, right. At least we're all on the same page. No shouting. You've been doing some of the heavy lifting, looking at the papers for us. What have you spotted? So the first story is the one that's sort of dominating headlines in Europe and in the US, which is about new package of EU sanctions. Now, it might sound like a bit of a dry story, but let me liven it up for you a little bit. So this is the 18th package that the EU is proposing to take against Russia, and they're going to target the Kremlin's ability to make money from oil and gas. So they want to lower the oil cap from $60 to $45. Now, the Russian economy, as we can see, if we look into the Russian papers, is actually tanking. So profits that have been made from oil and gas have almost halved in the last quarter. And so this is really going to hit the Russian budget very hard, which will hit the war economy very hard. And the EU is clearly targeting this very sort of harshly. And they've said that Russia will only understand a language of strength, and they've directly referenced the daily attacks that have really stepped up in the last few weeks since we've seen these peace negotiations between Russia and the US and Ukraine, targeting Ukraine's main cities, Kyiv, Odessa, etc. And that's what they're really trying to hit back. They're saying that this is one way that Russia will understand peace negotiations. There are two problems with this, though, aren't there? The firstly is the fact that all this needs to be approved by the EU's 27 member states, and there will be pushback internally from the likes of, I'm thinking immediately of Hungary. But secondly, Russia is able to export oil quite successfully. And is making money sending it to the likes of India, and then there are so-called ghost fleets. Is it more than a gesture? Will this have teeth?
Yes, so if we start with Hungary, and it's actually Slovakia as well, have sort of signalled that they will push back against this. Ultimately, both these countries have adopted every single packet of sanctions that has come through, but there is a massive row now between Hungary and Ukraine over a ring of spies, Hungarian spies, that Ukraine uncovered last month. And yesterday, President Zelensky gave an interview to Valas Online, which is one of Hungary's main online news sites, and he was sort of really harshly sort of pounding Orbán, the leader of Hungary, for the way that he is using Ukraine in his pre-election campaign. So that's one. I think we'll definitely see that issue coming up. But also, as you said, yes, Russia is still managing to export. So what this sanctions package wants to do is target third countries that are accepting Russian oil and gas and really take the teeth out of that Russian sort of weapon, and really target anyone who is accepting these transactions so that they also then are not able to trade as freely with the EU.
Let's move to a story in Le Monde that you want to draw our attention to, which has to do with the charging of fees, the raising of admission fees for non-European visitors to the Louvre. They want to slap a €30 charge on it, which to many it would be pretty prohibitive.
Yes, so this is the Louvre, Versailles also wants to do this, and then it's sort of a domino effect, the Paris Opera Garnier and maybe even the Arc de Triomphe, etc., etc. So yes, this is non-EU visitors will be slapped with this charge, so 30 euros up from 22 from the 1st of January 2026. And they're explaining this by saying, that they need more funding. So the Louvre, for example, is very well documented. There was a scandal earlier in the year that there's a leaking roof, it's the rain, for example, is missing priceless treasures that are, kept in the Louvre. But the optics of this don't look great. So people are worried that, overseas visitors who are coming to see their own actually nation's treasures that are kept in lots of French museums, they will be then charged sort of quite an enormous amount of money to be able to see these. But they're saying, the sort of French cultural ministers are saying that, look, this is something we need to do to be able to raise funds, repair our institutions so that we can properly showcase this art.
And a very quick look at a story in the Times about the last time I checked, you couldn't choose what kind of baby you were going to have. They just turn up. But apparently, if you have a boy, it's wrong. Bad news for you.
I know. Another one for the manosphere. That's so daughters are now seen as a safer bet. So, for example, in Japan, 75% of Japanese couples who want one child say they would prefer a daughter, and daughters are just seen as easier to raise and sort of less tricky to deal with as they're growing up. I mean, I have no experience of this, but as a daughter myself, I'm in favour of this. So,
Julia Lessiger, thank you so much for joining us on the line from London. You're listening to The Globalist live from Dufourstrasse 90 here in Zurich with me, Emma Nelson, and the time here in Zurich is 8:30 a.m. So a quick look now at some of today's other news headlines. US and Chinese negotiators have agreed on a framework to implement a truce on the current trade war between the two nations. 2 days of talks were held in London to diffuse tensions and ease export restrictions on both sides. An Argentinian court has upheld the fraud conviction of the former president Cristina Kirchner. The ruling makes 72-year-old Ms. Kirchner's conviction and 6-year prison sentence definitive. And 3 days of mourning are to be held in Austria after 10 people were shot dead at a school by a former pupil who then killed himself. About a dozen others were wounded in the shooting. Most of the victims were teenage pupils at the school in the city of Graz. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Time now for a look at some of the other headlines we're following here at Monocle. Here's Carlotta Rebello with her take on Eurostar's ambition to connect to new destinations from the UK to Germany and here in Switzerland.
Plans are on track to strengthen rail connections between London and the heart of Europe. Eurostar has announced ambitions to run direct trains from the UK to both Germany and Switzerland by the early 2030s, marking the next step in Europe's rail renaissance. While enjoyed at a slower pace than the direct flight from City Airport, passengers from London can expect to reach Frankfurt or Geneva in around 5 hours, taking advantage of a new fleet of trains. The move represents a €2 billion expansion that comes at a pivotal moment for the rail operator after its monopoly on cross-channel services comes under threat. Recently, competitors including Italy's Trenitalia, the UK's Virgin Group and Spain's Evelyn have shown interest in launching routes between mainland Europe and the UK. While the Channel Tunnel has the capacity to handle up to 1,000 trains per day, currently fewer than 400 trains use it. Plenty of passengers will be on board with the idea, and Eurostar certainly has the head start.
And my thanks to Monocle's Carlotta Rebello for that. For more from our editors and correspondents, why not sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Well, the time here in Zurich is 8:32 a.m, just nudging 8:33, and we're going to stay with travel and tourism now, because with an estimated 40 million tourists visiting every year, Switzerland is not short of tourists and visitors, and the numbers are hitting record levels. 18.5 million overnight stays were recorded between November and the end of April. That's a lot of birch muesli, ladies and gentlemen. Swiss hoteliers are having to step up to meet this demand, and to tell us more, let's hear from Juliet Linley, journalist, broadcaster based here in Zurich, regular Monocle voice around the table. Welcome Lovely to be here, Juliet Lenley, seeing you in Dufourstrasse 90.
Lovely to see you, Emma. You should come here more often.
I would absolutely love to. So just like many of the other gazillion tourists coming to Switzerland, where are they all going?
That's such a good question. I mean, there was a nearly 3% jump year on year. So we're looking at numbers that hadn't been seen since 2008, if you want. And it's not just ski resorts. You always think that since these stats cover between November and April, you'd just be looking at numbers jumping sort of on the slopes. But we're looking at cities even like our very own Zürich, Geneva and Basel that have been witnessing big jumps in overnight stays. And that's always interesting to see, especially because Basel, the stats didn't cover the Eurovision Song Contest final, which you would have thought would have bring in loads of pop crazy fans to our cities.
The idea is what? This is a domestic thing or this is an international thing? Because I was in Austria a couple of weeks ago and they said that there's been an amazing flip, that until a few years ago, 75% of the visitors were German speaking. And now it's the other way around. 75% of the visitors are English speaking or non-German speaking. Is there a similar thing happening here?
Well, this being a very balanced country, it's half and half. So out of the 18 million overnight stays, half of them are actually local Swiss-based guests and half are from abroad. So 9 million versus 9 million. And if Emma, if we want to look at nationalities, well, top of the charts are the Germans. There's 700,000 guests had overnight stays over the last months. Then the French and then the Italians. And if you want to look at the top 10, you've got Germany, France, Italy, and then the United States, the UK, China, Netherlands, Spain, and you've got a lot of Brazilians coming too. So it's interesting to see that the top three are, of course, visitors coming from countries that border on Switzerland. And they are particularly choosing the regions which speak their own languages. Don't you just love that? But in general, you've got Germans, French and Italians flocking in large numbers, but they're not the ones heading to the cities. So the ones, let's say to Zurich, it's more Americans who are coming. And Lucerne, it's also Americans. So to Zurich, I'm guessing it's for mainly business reasons, or maybe to jump in the lake as you and I are going to do as soon as we come off air.
I don't think we are.
But Lucerne...
Well, dip our toes, Juliet, let's be honest.
We might dip those toes.
Yeah, we'll dip
but
them.
in Lucerne, you know, it's that old wooden covered bridge that the Americans love. It's the breathtaking views of the Vierwaldstättersee, of the lakes. And then let's look at Bern. Bern is our capital, but guess what? It's attracting tens of thousands of Korean nationals. Do you want to know why? Because parts of a South Korean Netflix hit called Crash Landing on You were filmed on the lake of Brienz in Eisetzwald. Not sure you've watched it, Emma. I'm going to be hitting Netflix this evening to watch it, but it's a romantic drama with the protagonist discovering they had previously met in Switzerland. So there are a lot of flashbacks to our pristine, beautiful country, and there's a particularly pretty pier on Lake Brienz, which is an Instagrammable spot where many of them seem to come from Seoul to take pictures of themselves there. Interestingly, the numbers from India, though, for the winter months are not in the top 10, and that's because probably they'll be coming over the summer months because, of course, so many Bollywood movies are also filmed in our mountains, and a lot of visitors from India tend to come and visit.
I'm surprised there's any space for anyone to move. The fact remains is that obviously when you have all these more people, all this growing number of people coming in, you have to step up, and we've heard quite a lot about Switzerland renovating its grand Belle Epoque palaces and stepping up to cater for the uber luxury market. But what in a more widespread general way are Swiss hospitality owners doing to make sure that they can cope with this influx?
Yeah, interesting about the Belle Epoque palaces, isn't it? You have a lot of Middle Eastern visitors who are drawn to them, as well as Asians and Americans. They sort of love the heritage-rich, story-filled properties, and people are jumping on that. Hoteliers and people with business savvy are looking to upgrade these old buildings because you need to bring them up to modern environmental standards as well as luxury standards. But then in general, Emma, you can't get away from the fact that global warming certainly is affecting a lot of, let's say, the pristine destinations. Let's look at the mountain destinations, the luxury resorts, because of the uncertainty that comes with it. So a lot of hotels hoteliers are getting creative. I mean, of course, they're creating, let's say, spa experiences. So if it's particularly snowy on a day, blizzardy, and you can't go out on the slopes, then you're going to enjoy a spa experience. But also, what if there is no snow, but you had booked that hotel room with your wife on your honeymoon? Then they're having to create other things. They're also, I saw this one piece about they're creating sort of painting and pottery experiences so that while it's bad weather outside, you could be doing something creative indoors. But Emma, picture all those alpha males going, let's say, on a stag weekend, hitting the slopes, and then all of a sudden, are they really going to pivot to pottery if they can't go on the pistes?
What's not nice about pivoting to poverty? Pottery, not poverty. Juliet Lindley, journalist and broadcaster, thank you so much for joining me around the table. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist, live from Zürich. It's 13:38 in Jakarta, and Indonesia's government has revoked the permits of 4 nickel mining companies in southwest Papua. The mining operations in Raja Ampat violated Indonesian law that prohibits mining on small islands. Well, Indonesia holds approximately half of the world's nickel supply, and nickel is a critical component of electric vehicle batteries. This decision will affect a global industry worth billions of dollars. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Leonard Simanjuntak, who's County Director for Greenpeace in Indonesia. Very good afternoon to you, Leonard.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
So why has the Indonesian government issued these suspensions?
Because there's a huge public outcry over the last week after we did a direct action in International Critical Mineral Conference in Jakarta last Tuesday. And basically the public outcry has been so huge because people are concerned that Raja Ampat, which is a World Heritage, is being violated and starting to be destroyed by these nickel mining activities. Indonesian government, of course, needs to, we believe, needs to keep their international reputation. They enjoy this status of a global geopark for Raja Ampat, and it's actually another significant economic options for Raja Ampat rather than having this nickel mining in those in the island, in those beautiful islands.
What are the opportunities available, given the fact that, as we have mentioned, that the amount of nickel that is produced, I think it's like half of the world's nickel supply comes from Indonesia, and nickel is such an important part of electric car batteries, for starters?
Indonesia has been on a very massive nickel downstreaming campaign over the last 10 to 15 years. And the big islands of Sulawesi, different parts of Sulawesi, as well as in North Maluku, has been mined. And we have 44 smelters now. But there is limit to everything. Raja Ampat has to have alternatives, because Raja Ampat can have that significant alternatives to be a premium, and it has been proven, a premium tourism destination. And it can generate state revenue at the level which is comparable or even more than doing nickel mining in Raja Ampat with all the destruction that could and already taking place, and can be even more worse in the future if these nickel mines are not stopped.
So tell us what happens next, because those the nickel mining companies are surely going to appeal and are going to try and keep their business there.
Well, the government, the president has revoked 4 out of 5 nickel mines. They will have a right to appeal, but I think it's already a very strong political decision. So we hope they obey with that decision, and we will continue monitoring the execution of this decision. There is another mines that the government decided not to revoke, the one in Gak Island, which is actually the largest one, and in production stage, producing millions of nickels per year. We believe that it also creates significant impacts to Raja Ampat, although administratively it's outside of the geopark region, but we believe that it has a strong potential to also impact the tourism industries in Raja Ampat, and we believe it has to be revoked as well, the mining license in Gak Island.
Leonard Simanjuntak, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
Now, the headline coming from Apple's camp at the Worldwide Developers Conference, or WWDC 25, was not of a new product this week or a gadget, but of a new material. So-called liquid glass will be used in almost every one of the company's devices. And to tell us more, David Phelan is Monocle's technology correspondent, and he joins us from the Californian city of Cupertino, the home of Apple right now, standing outside the Steve Jobs Theatre, no less. David, how are you?
That's right. Yes, I'm good, thank you. Yes, I'm here in Apple Park in its worldwide headquarters, and the Steve Jobs Theatre, which is this beautiful 1,000-seater theatre that they hold events in on a regular basis.
So they let you into the inner sanctum to bring new stuff, and the new stuff this year is not a thing, but it's a material.
That's right. The Worldwide Developers Conference, as you say, Dub, as it's affectionately called, is where they announce all the new software that's going to be on the iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple TV, Apple Watch, when it comes out in September. But they announce it now so that developers can get to work on it, so that they can improve the apps to make them compatible with it. And there was an awful lot this year. Apple Intelligence was the big thing. Last year, you might have thought they'd make another big jump in Apple Intelligence, but in fact, they were much quieter on that, saying that instead of releasing a major new version of it, actually Apple Intelligence from now on is going to be just gently, subtly woven into every product and every release. And that seems to be the case. There are lots of new features that are not related to Apple Intelligence, and even more that are. But there's a huge number of things that were announced on Monday.
And so what with your pick, I think it was 13 things, wasn't it, the last time I counted? What were your top 2?
Well, liquid glass you mentioned looks stunning. It's the new design that is going to be used on the iPhone. But for the first time only, not just the iPhone, it's also going to feature gently on Apple Watch, in a big way on iPad and on the Mac. One of the big things about the new software releases this year is that it's going to make all the products cohere together in a way they never have before.
In what way does that work? Because one assumes that Apple's quite good at making things work together anyway, to start off.
It means that if you're one of the growing number of people who has more than one Apple product, that there will be enormous continuity between the look and the way that the different products work. So if you've got an iPhone and an iPad, the way they look is now so similar that you could almost be forgiven for not knowing which one you were using. But and the same now has applied to the Mac as well, which has got a design for the first time much closer to the iPad and iPhone than ever before. And one of the things about liquid glass is that it means that you can change the color of the icons for the apps on your Mac or your iPad. Even if you want, you can make them clear. They look transparent. They look fantastic when they're transparent, though I suspect it might be a little less intuitive when you're looking for that app that you haven't seen for a few weeks and it's hidden because you're looking at basically the shape rather than the color for once.
There's an interesting comment that was in the New York Times in the last couple of hours saying that the tech industry is at the moment building new artificial intelligence systems into our devices. And I'm quoting here, Apple is focusing on making its products look prettier. How accurate and a criticism is that?
Well, there is some accuracy in that, but the funny thing is that the reaction of the developers and everyone here has been that actually is the most exciting thing of all. The new design is so eye-catching and so persuasive that it sort of calls into question whether everyone is really after AI in the way that lots of manufacturers, including Apple, have made us believe that we should be. Actually, good design seems to trump the peripheral AI capabilities that are being pushed at us from all corners. There are definitely AI capabilities. There's a very cool one called Hold Assist on the iPhone, so that if you have to be on hold, the iPhone can actually spot when it hears hold music, and it can intervene and say, do you want me to deal with this? And it holds your place in the queue. Poor iPhone has to listen to the wretched hold music while you go off and do something else. When a real person gets back to the call that you can deal with, it rings you, and while you're waiting to come back to it, it plays a recording to that agent saying, person's on their way, just wait a moment. And it means, please God, we don't have to be on hold for hours at a time.
I'm looking forward to that being installed. Brand new software they're going into the systems, renaming, rebranding, reworking. Yes,
the rebranding is very interesting. Every software version has a different number. iOS 18 on the iPhone at the moment. Apple Watch has watchOS 11. To make things much simpler, everything is going to have the same number, and it's the number of the year that the operating software is mostly used in. So the software that's released in September will mostly be used in 2026. So it's iOS 26, Mac OS 26, iPad OS 26. You get the idea. And again, it's a way of making the different disparate software versions work together and seem simpler to users.
And finally, two new bits which might be sort of incredibly useful each day is that there's going to be a live translation service, which people who like learning languages will obviously faint in horror at. And also something that will make you faint in horror. It's going to have a workout buddy, which means I thought my scales shouted at me to do more exercise. There's something else to make you feel bad.
Yes, that's right. Workout buddy is a pretty cool thing. It means that when you're going for a run, and this does use AI, it will create a message saying you've got off to a really great start, or just keep going a bit faster. It'll encourage you, in other words, and it'll be a clever way to inspire you as you work out. And that's going to be part of the workout app on Apple Watch.
Does it give you purely encouraging words, or can you set it to give it to shout at you a bit?
No, I don't think you can make it into a bad coach and a nasty person who's going to just frighten you into working out harder. No, I think it's very much in tune with the voices are AI created, but they are based on the not just the voices, but the spirit of the Fitness Plus trainers, who are all very positive. So I don't think you'll get a negative sound from the workout buddy.
That's such a shame, and there is scope for growth there. Quick line on the translations.
Yeah, so the translation is very impressive. You call someone, they answer in a foreign language. The phone recognizes that they're doing that, and they offer you a language pack which can be downloaded in a few seconds if you need it. And you may already have it on your phone. If you do, then you just speak, and you then hear and see your words translated into the other person's language, and their replying words, you then hear and see them in English, if that's your language, for example. And I have seen it demoed. It's very smooth, it's very fast. And as far as I can tell, because obviously I didn't speak both languages on the call, it seemed to be effective.
David Phelan, the prospect for mischief with that as well is phenomenal. David, our technology correspondent on the line from Cupertino at Apple's HQ in California. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Now, if you're lucky, in not very long, we may hear this being played live.
Let's go! 'Cause I'm in the stars tonight. So watch me bring out fire, set the night light. Hey! Shining through the city.
The joys of BTS's wonderful song Dynamite. Well, fans of the K-pop legends have reason to be in an absolute frenzy. The band are completing their 2 years of mandatory military service. Two members, RM and V, are already out and greeted their fans with salutes and indeed a saxophone solo to herald their liberty. Well, Bernie Cho is president of the Seoul-based K-pop agency DFSB Collective. He joins me once again. A very good afternoon to you, Bernie, joining us from Seoul.
Yes, great to be here again.
And it was quite a moment when we saw RM and V. People had travelled to a very, very long distance to see this, hadn't they?
Oh, yes. I mean, as much as HYBE asked fans not to come and greet their favorite superstars for BTS, not only did they come, they came from around the world. And they're not just here to just see them come out of the military, but since June 1st, there have just been a plethora of special events leading up to what's coming up very, very soon on June 13th and June 14th, which is BTS Festa. And so the timing couldn't be more perfect with the remaining members of BTS coming out almost clockwork every day. And more importantly, it's being covered in real time by media from around the world. I've honestly lost track of how many journalists have been asking me for tickets or, access. And I'm just wondering whether they're calling as journalists or as fans.
And indeed, do we know how they fared while suited and booted and doing their service?
Well, it's interesting is that, obviously before they went into the military, there was a lot of debate as to whether they should go or whether they should get an exemption, but they decided to bite the bullet and go. And although many fans and critics and analysts were quite worried about the impact of BTS going into the military, I think in hindsight, it was not just a smart, but perhaps just a brilliant move, because the brand of BTS, I think in many ways wasn't even put on pause. If anything, it became bigger and better. And what I mean by that is in some ways sort of the divide and conquer, where as the different members of BTS were going in, each and every one of the members were able to launch very successful solo projects, solo efforts, solo releases, so much so that if we look at the numbers, HYBE didn't really suffer a hiccup. If anything, they really saw a growth and a rise in their success and, more importantly, in their stock price. And I think it's safe to say that when BTS, the members, went into the military, they were going in as arguably the biggest boy band in the world. But if we calculate and count the individual success of all the individual members through their individual products, when they get back together, they're no longer going to be a boy band. In many ways, I think it's safe to say they're going to come back as a supergroup.
Well, here's this thing, isn't it? Time moves on, people move on, they find their new thing that they love. I mean, you talk about BTS as a supergroup, but will they still be the BTS of old?
Well, that's the sort of question that fans to financial analysts are asking. And I think it's safe to say the market has reacted very positively. Hybe, the home of BTS, their stock price just from the members coming out this week of the military hit a 3-year high. And for this year alone, they're up 50% in stock price. So that sends a very strong and very loud signal that they feel confident that BTS will pick up where they left off. Now, what's also really fascinating is the fact that when BTS went into the military, they were pretty much generating most of the revenues of Hybe. During their 2-year hiatus, other bands from the Hybe stable stepped out and stepped up in terms of finding success, so much so that, again, without BTS performing or releasing new records or songs or music videos, last year, when we look at the top 10 best-selling albums in the world, according to the IFPI, 90% were K-pop albums, and 40% of the top 10 best-selling albums in the world were from Hybe artists, whether they be 17 and Hyphen, Tomorrow and Together. And so it clearly showed that although Hybe was really built on the blood, sweat, and tears of BTS, they have developed a very deep bench of talent, be it boy bands or girl bands, so much so that, the strength of Hybe, the generated revenues is they're basically now the 4th largest music label in the world. And again, in terms of just understanding how big this company is, they generated nearly $1.7 billion in revenues last year. And to put that into context, they generated almost 2 times more revenues than Paris Saint-Germain, the recent Champions League winners. They also generate nearly 2 times more revenues than the entire music economy of Sweden. So we're talking massive.
Benny Cho, thank you as ever for joining us on the line from Seoul. That was Benny Cho, president of the Seoul-based K-pop agency DFSB Collective. And that's all the time we have for today's programme, coming to you live from Zurich. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Desiree Bandley, Carlotta Rebello, Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks. Our studio manager back in London was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Maylee Evans. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday, and the Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. We'll be up in Wengen in the Bernese Oberland region of Switzerland. Hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening.